Hello, friends and family, and welcome back to episode 9 of 10 about Alta Rivers Gilbert Thornton and her family. It is hard to believe that we are almost finished with the series. We've spent this series talking mostly about Alta and her side of the family. Last episode, we learned about Alta's very public breakup and found a picture of her from around 1906. This episode, we will get to know about her husband, Curtis Dow Thornton. I'm recording this on Memorial Day of 2026, which is appropriate because to know Curtis is to know a little bit about his military service that stationed him at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, the Philippine Islands, and then later at Fort McKenzie in Sheridan, Wyoming. At the end of the episode, I will share some theories about how and when Curtis and Alta may have met. So let's get started. Episode 9, titled Curtis Dow Thornton Meets Alta Rivers. We started this series with these two photos of Curtis and Alta Rivers Thornton that were part of a family narrative written by one of their granddaughters, Susie Giltner Paxton. Curtis Thornton is remembered as a farmer and a very kind and loving grandfather who was a sharpshooter in the United States Army. Here is a photo of him when he was younger, I'm guessing about 25 years old. Curtis was born September 28, 1880, lived to be 92 years of age, passing away in March of 1973, about 7 years before I was born. Here's a snapshot of his family tree. His parents were Levi Thornton and Annette Bishop, and he had two brothers, one older, Frederick, and one younger, Raymond. I don't have a birth certificate for Curtis, but we know from other records that he was born in Cannon, Indiana, which is in Jefferson County where his parents married. And this is a copy of that marriage certificate for Levi Thornton and Annette Bishop, or Nettie, as she was called. This is dated May of 1872. As a reminder, Jefferson County is just to the west of Switzerland County in southern Indiana, where Alta Rivers and her family are from. The blue star is Curtis's birthplace, the yellow star being where we saw Alta's family. When I started my research, I incorrectly assumed that Curtis lost his father as a teenager because most online trees say that Levi died before 1897 when Annette marries her second husband. But I learned that actually Annette divorced Levi in 1897. This article from April of that year explains that Annette L. Thornton seeks a legal separation from Levi A. Thornton, to whom she was married in 1872. The plaintiff says she has been compelled to support her son Raymond Thornton, aged 9 years, and is now endeavoring to educate him in the city schools. The defendant, she says, has failed to contribute as he should to support his family. A few short months later, Annette is granted the divorce and her maiden name was restored. She marries in October 1897 to John Burt Shoemaker. Similarly to Alta Rivers, I could not find Curtis in a census record prior to 1910. I was, however, able to find him in a couple of Indianapolis city directories. It appears that Curtis is living with his older brother at 519 Abbott Street between 1903 and 1905, when he would have been around the ages of 23 and 25. Maybe even before that, just because I didn't find the record doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Curtis is listed as a driver in 1903 and a laborer in 1904 and 1905. Several people in the family, including my Aunt Susie, believed that Curtis served in World War I. However, his military service was actually 11 years before that, as World War I was around July of 1914 through 1918. Curtis Thornton enlisted in the United States Army in March of 1905, and you can see from this register of enlistment that he was enlisted in the 18th Infantry Company M and sent to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas in the summer of 1905. We also learned from this register that Curtis was 5'6" tall, fair complexioned, light brown hair, and blue eyes. This document is difficult to read, but describes his first military service. It says, "Know ye that Curtis Thornton, a corporal of Army M of the 18th Regiment of the U.S. Infantry, was enlisted at Indianapolis, Indiana on the 20th day of March 1905 to serve 3 years and is hereby honorably discharged from the Army of the United States." It goes on to say that he was enlisted when he was 24 and a half years old. He was a laborer at the time, had blue eyes, and was 5'6". It also references Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. So basically, it seems that he enlisted for 3 years, but his first service was actually a little bit shorter than that. He was not in any active battles during his first service period, but we know from the next record that he re-enlists the next day and is deployed to the Philippine Islands. And here is that second record. You see at the top, it says enlistment period second. It says his previous service was 2 years, 3 months, 4 days in Company M of the U.S. Infantry. It goes on to say that Curtis was a sharpshooter and expert rifleman, the second page on your screen being his certificate of proficiency. Under remarks, it says that he was honest and faithful, exceptionally good non-commissioned officer, served in Philippine Islands from November 1907 to October 15th, 1909. In the section Battles, Engagements, Skirmishes, and Expeditions, it lists a number of different engagements from the Philippines against, quote, hostile Moros. Even though the Philippine War was technically over, the United States stayed a few more years to fight against insurgents. This video by Mr. Beats is titled "The War Your American History Teachers Probably Didn't Tell You About," and we're going to talk about the end of the war since that is when Curtis served.
The main part of the Philippine-American War officially ended on July 2nd, 1902, after Congress passed the Philippine Organic Act, a law that included the establishment of a Bill of Rights for Filipinos and a Filipino-led representative government, assuming hostilities ended. Heck, President Roosevelt even proclaimed full and complete forgiveness and amnesty to all Filipinos who had participated in the conflict. Well, hostilities did end. Okay, they mostly ended. Technically, the war still carried on in the southern Philippines, where a group known as the Moros continued to resist American occupation in what became known as the Moro Rebellion. The Moros were only finally defeated after the Battle of Budbaksak on June 15, 1913. After this, the United States controlled the Philippines and protected it for the next 33 years. That's when the Philippines finally achieved full independence.
Hopefully you found that interesting. I definitely highly encourage to watch the whole video or find others if you're interested about the topic. To round out Curtis's military service, we've got this 1910 census record where he was returned from the Philippines and now at Fort McKenzie in Sheridan, Wyoming. I've not seen it, but I'm told that somebody in the family has a letter from someone in the Army asking that he re-enlist because of how skilled of a rifleman he was. But to my knowledge, he declined, making October 1909 his last date of active duty. We do know that he was required to register for the World War I and II drafts. This is a copy of the first World War draft card. At this time, he's 37 years old. We have confirmation of his birthday being September 28th, 1880. He's described as short, so now we know where I get that gene from. Slender, blue eyes, and brown hair. And then here's the second card. By now, he's 61 years old and listed as a farmer. Putting it all together now, here's the timeline we have for Curtis. Born in 1880, we don't have any records of him before 1903 when he's living with his older brother, and then he enlisted in the Army and was in service between March 1905 and June 1910. We also know that less than 4 months after returning from Fort McKenzie, Curtis and Alta Rivers get married, October 5, 1910. And here are those records. This is the announcement of Curtis Thornton and Alta Gilbert applying for their marriage license, and a copy of that marriage license on the right. We see that Curtis is 30 years old by October 1910, and here his occupation is listed as a butcher. It confirms his parents are Nettie Bishop and Levi Thornton. And then Alta Gilbert is listed as age 24. Her occupation says housekeeper, so perhaps she's quit her job at the factory, or maybe she was only doing seasonal work at the time the census was taken. Disappointingly, it just says Indiana as her birthplace. It does not give a specific town. It names her father as Samuel Gilbert and her mother as Alice Babb. The witness is Alta's sister Flora Holwager at 515 Warren Avenue, the same address we saw on that 1910 census that we've shown several times before. So we've got one more record really solidifying the fact that her parents were Samuel and Alice and that Flora was her sister. And here we get a sweet description of Curtis and Alta's marriage ceremony. It says, the marriage of Miss Alta Gilbert and Curtis Thornton took place last Wednesday evening at the home of the bride's sister, Mrs. Jacob Holwager, on Warren Avenue, the Reverend Samuel Welker officiating. The ceremony was followed by a wedding supper, after which the couple went to their new home on Birch Avenue. The bride wore white silk and carried roses. The rooms were trimmed with ferns and smilax. Obviously, there is no way to know who was in attendance for the wedding, but I couldn't help but wonder about it. So here I created an imagined guest list for both the bride side and the groom side, and these are all of the individuals who were still alive at the time they got married. So we've got Alta's siblings and their spouses and family. We've got Robert and Samuel Gilbert, as well as Caroline's half-brother and half-sister, Edward and Mary. We doubt Fred was there because we know that he has changed his name. We don't know exactly where Floyd is, but think that he may have been alive as well. And then on the groom side, we've got Curtis's two brothers and some aunts and uncles. So the big question becomes, how and when did Curtis and Alta meet? I'm going to share with you my 3 favorite theories, but definitely interested to know what others think. My first theory is that Curtis returned to Indianapolis and immediately met and fell in love with Alta Rivers. My imagination went wild with this one. But that was before I had all of the pieces and realized that there were actually so many other opportunities that they could have met before he left. So this is probably the least likely. Also, according to family members, Curtis is said to have written Alta a letter, not knowing her exact address, and just addressed it to Indianapolis, Indiana, but somehow she still got it. The letter allegedly said that he had something important to talk to her about when he returned, the implication being that he was going to ask her to marry him when he returned home. My second theory, and probably the most likely one, is that they met in Indianapolis before Curtis enlisted in the Army. We know that Curtis was living in Indianapolis in 1903, possibly earlier, and enlisted in 1905. We know from episode 7 that Alta Rivers went to work in Indianapolis in October 1904, and possibly had ties to Indianapolis even earlier than that if she was raised in an orphanage there. So this theory would allow for the letter theory to be true. Interestingly, I found mention of Miss Alta Gilbert in 2 publications of the Kentucky Post announcing unclaimed letters. This one from May 1909, when Curtis would have still been in the Philippines. And the second one is from a newspaper dated December 19. Of course, we don't know if Curtis was the author of these letters or if Alta ever received them. But it just makes me wonder, maybe it really would have been possible for Curtis to address a letter to Alta in Indianapolis, and she still would have received it because maybe it would have been published in the unclaimed letters column. Or maybe Curtis really did send a letter, but she did not receive it, but somehow they reunited anyway. My third theory is that Curtis and Alta's families may have known each other. Remember that Curtis and Alta are born in neighboring counties around the same time. I also found Curtis's mother living in Johnson County in 1900, the same county where all of the articles mentioning Alta, Flora, Samuel, and Robert are in episode 7. Nettie dies in 1902, and the articles we found did not start being published until 1904, but it is possible that the families lived in the same county at the same time and may have crossed paths. Here is Curtis Thornton's timeline again, this time with some information about Alta sprinkled into it. So we know that he's in Indianapolis, 1903 to 1905. If you skip to 1906, that's the article about Alta's breakup. And we've got two different theories of how long she and William Phillips were connected. So one article has Alta Rivers saying, Will and I have been engaged for a year and a half, and a second article interviews her sister Martha, and it says that Alta's engagement was announced May 21st, 1906, and that the couple had dated for about a year. So you see their timelines overlapping a little bit. It makes me wonder if maybe Curtis knew Will Phillips as well. No matter your favorite theory about how and when they may have met, one thing is clear. Alta and Curtis were in a very loving relationship that produced 6 children, many grandchildren, and many more great-grandchildren like myself. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed getting to know a little bit about Curtis Thornton. I will see you in 2 weeks where I will share our final episode titled The Full Life of Alta Rivers Gilbert Thornton, where I'll share a little bit about their life as an adult and their children just to round out the story. Thank you again for watching. We'll see you next time.